This is Rainy Night Horrors. Outside, the storm brews, and with it comes something darker. Every drop masks a sound, every shadow holds a shape. You're not imagining it, you're hearing the truth. Listen closely, it's already here. The twin beams of my old sedan sliced the ink of the night, painting a fleeting pale stripe across the endless tarmac, unfurling into shadow. Hours had bled together, measured only by the highway's hypnotic drone and the dashboard's faint emerald glow, ticking away the deep end of the night. Then, abruptly, a shape condensed from the roadside gloom, a solitary figure, thumb stark against the darkness, like an apparition summoned by the lonely road. A phantom echo of my mother's caution surfaced. Never stop. You invite the unknown. Her voice, a remembered sternness. Yet, as my headlights swept closer, the figure resolved into a man whose very posture screamed depletion, shoulders bowed under a weight heavier than any pack. Out here, swallowed by the vast, vacant expanse, the odds of another vehicle materializing felt cosmically slim. Before the voice of reason could fully articulate its protest, the crunch of gravel announced my surrender to the shoulder, dust billowing like a spectral shroud in the rearview. The man hastened forward, a weary topography of relief etching itself onto his features as the passenger window hummed downward. "Godsend," he rasped, the sound like stones tumbling in a dry creek bed. "Been waiting an age." Closer now, the dim interior light revealed the cartography of a hard life etched onto his face. Older than I'd guessed, perhaps nearing his 6th decade. Creases radiated from eyes that held an unnerving, sharp lucidity, stark against the surrounding fatigue. "Destination?" I inquired, striving for nonchalance, though a cold tendril of disquiet had begun its slow curl deep within my stomach. "Just a piece up the way," he answered, his hand already finding the door latch. "Town called Redemption, maybe 50 miles on. That'll do me." A flicker of hesitation. My fingers hovered near the lock, but the image of myself stranded, watching taillights recede into the indifferent night, spurred me. A resigned sigh escaped me as the lock clicked open. "Climb in," I offered, managing a tight smile. "My route passes through." He settled into the seat beside me, clutching a scuffed canvas satchel to his chest as if it held his very soul. Pulling back onto the highway's smooth current, I registered a faint, unwelcome scent. Stale sweat mingled with a curious metallic tang I couldn't quite decipher. "Name's Elias," I volunteered, hoping to puncture the thickening silence. "Silas," he returned, his gaze fixed forward, scanning the void beyond the headlights. "Appreciate the lift. Not many would pause these days." I offered a non-committal murmur, my thoughts already charting the distance to redemption. 50 miles, 45 minutes, give or take at this pace. Manageable. We rode encased in silence, punctuated only by the engine's steady thrum and the occasional rustle of Silas shifting his weight. Peripheral glances became my covert study. Something about him felt dissonant, a discordant note in the night's quiet symphony. "So," I ventured finally, the quietude becoming unbearable, "what business takes you out this far?" Silas remained quiet for a beat, and when he spoke, his voice seemed to emanate from a farther, colder place. "Seeking someone," he stated. "Someone who owes a debt from long ago." An involuntary shiver traced my spine, though the source remained obscure. "Ah," I managed, attempting lightness. "Catching up with an old acquaintance." He produced a sound less like laughter and more like a sharp, percussive bark that made me jump. "Not precisely," he said, "but I'll find him. And when that happens..." His voice dwindled, his knuckles whitening on the satchel strap. My throat constricted. "Well?" I forced out, the words sounding thin. "Hope your search pans out." Silas turned his head then, his eyes catching the dashboard light, gleaming with a focused intensity. "Oh, it will," he affirmed, his tone low and resonant. "Been hunting a long time. Getting close now. Feel it in my bones." I nodded mutely, my grip strangling the steering wheel, knuckles bleached white. Every nerve ending shrieked a warning. "Stop. Eject him. Now." But the sheer isolation pinned me, the fear of what he might do if abandoned here overriding the instinct to flee. So I drove on, the miles dissolving with excruciating slowness. Silas had fallen silent once more, yet I felt the weight of his stare, an unnerving scrutiny. The air inside the sedan grew thick, heavy, making each breath a conscious effort. "You know?" Silas interjected suddenly, startling me. "You bear a resemblance to the man I'm tracking." My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat I was certain he could perceive. "That right?" I croaked. Silas nodded, his gaze unwavering. "Aye. Similar frame. Hair's the same shade. Drives the same kind of car too." He paused, his free hand dipping into the canvas satchel beside him. "Funny, the paths that cross, isn't it?" I offered no reply. My focus narrowed to the ribbon of road ahead. Far off, a faint constellation of lights shimmered. Redemption. Just a few more miles. I could endure. "Want to hear another funny thing?" Silas pressed, his voice acquiring a razor's edge. I never specified what kind of car he drove. Ice flooded my veins. My mouth opened, a soundless gasp. But before any word could form, a cold, unyielding pressure met my side. "Pull over," Silas commanded, the earlier veneer of weary gratitude utterly evaporated. My thoughts fragmented, desperately seeking an escape route where none existed. The object against my ribs, surely a gun, left no room for negotiation. With trembling hands, I eased the sedan onto the gravel shoulder. "Kill the engine," Silas ordered. The command was obeyed with numb precision. The moment the key left the ignition, he plucked it from my grasp. "Now," he continued, his voice chillingly level, "we're going to converse, and you're going to tell me precisely what transpired that night 10 years back." Confusion warred with burgeoning terror. What? What are you talking about?" I stammered. "I don't know anything about..." The pressure intensified, silencing me. "Don't!" Silas snarled. "Don't play games. I know it was you. You annihilated everything. My wife, my children, my life. Now, it's time I take yours." The horrifying truth dawned like a physical blow. He saw not me, but the ghost he chased across a decade. "Please," I pleaded, my voice fracturing. "This is a mistake. I'm not him. My name is Elias Thorne. I'm 25. I work in tech back in the city. 10 years ago, whatever happened, I wasn't involved." Silas's eyes narrowed, a flicker of uncertainty crossing his face, before hardening back into grim certainty. "Good try," he growled, "but I've hunted too long to be fooled by 11th hour lies." My mind spun, grasping for leverage. "My wallet," I said urgently. "Check my driver's license. It proves who I am." For a protracted moment, Silas merely stared, his gaze boring into me as if trying to excavate my soul. Then, a slow nod. "Fine," he conceded, "but try anything clever." The unspoken threat hung heavy, punctuated by the cold steel against my ribs. My hands shook as I fumbled for my wallet, extracting the plastic card and holding it aloft. Silas squinted in the dimness, his brow furrowing as he read. I held my breath, a fragile hope fluttering. This isn't possible," he muttered, snatching the license for a closer look. "It is," I insisted, my voice gaining a modicum of steadiness. "I'm not your man. Please, just let me walk away. I won't say a word. I swear it." Silas looked from the license back to my face, conflict churning in his expression. For an instant, I thought reason might prevail. Then his features set like stone once more. "No," he rasped, shaking his head. "No, it's a trick. 10 years is plenty of time to forge an identity. But I know that face. I'd never forget." Despair washed over me. He was unreachable, locked in his narrative of vengeance. I was merely the vessel for his decade-old rage. "Out of the car," Silas commanded, motioning with the weapon. "Please," I whispered, a final futile appeal. "Don't do this. Whatever was done to you, I'm sorry. But this won't fix it." For the briefest fraction of a second, something flickered deep in Silas's eyes. Doubt, regret, a ghost of the man swallowed by grief. It vanished as swiftly as it appeared. "Out," he repeated, his voice devoid of inflection, utterly final. With no recourse left, I pushed the door open and stepped into the cool, indifferent night air. Silas followed, the gun unwavering as he rounded the car. "Start walking," he directed, gesturing towards the impenetrable darkness flanking the road. As I took the first hesitant steps away from the highway's relative sanctuary, thoughts of those I was leaving behind flooded my mind. My parents, friends, colleagues. Would they search endlessly, mirroring Silas's own obsessive quest? Or would I dissolve into anecdote, another cautionary fable whispered about the perils of solitary roads and ill-judged kindness? How this night concluded remained terrifyingly unknown, but moving deeper into the blackness, Silas a menacing presence at my back, I forged a silent vow. Should I somehow survive this, instinct would never again be overridden, and the outstretched thumb of a stranger would forever remain unanswered. The distant lights of redemption, once a beacon of hope, began to recede, swallowed by the vast, unfeeling dark of the desert night. That particular night clings to memory, sharp-edged and cold. A hush had fallen over the cafe, the low lights casting long, wavering shadows across the venerable floorboards that sighed and groaned with every minute shift of our weight. Leo and I, drained from the long hours steaming milk and wiping down counters, faced the final task, reconciling the day's earnings. No particular urgency pressed upon us, yet an odd, insistent hum persisted at the base of my skull, a silent command to hurry. The very air felt thick, viscous, muffling the already dim illumination. Alone we were, adrift in this historic shell of a house, where each incidental noise, the refrigerator's ancient thrum, the click of cooling pipes, reverberated through the empty spaces like a pronouncement. From the direction of the kitchen, a soft thud sounded, then again, dismissed. My focus narrowed to the crisp bills and dull coins spread before me, a tangible anchor against the encroaching unease. Get this done. Get out. 6 months Leo and I had navigated the quirks of this establishment. The building itself was a town landmark, a relic stitched together with complaining staircases, heavy, age-darkened ceiling beams, and a baffling collection of nooks and crannies seemingly devoid of purpose. The owner had carved a dining space from the main ground floor expanse, tucking the kitchen into an adjacent room. Beyond that stretched a long shadowed corridor leading to storage and a pair of perpetually locked doors concealing unknown chambers. Whispers circulated among the staff, fleeting shapes glimpsed at the hallway's terminus, disembodied voices when solitude should have reigned. Ghost stories, some murmured. I'd never lent them credence, raised as I was on practicality, on the solid evidence of sight and touch, distrustful of the unexplained. 11 o'clock approached. The last customer had departed an hour prior, leaving behind the lingering scent of coffee and cooling pastry. We often lingered past the official 10 o'clock closing, ensuring the dining room gleamed and the kitchen stood orderly. Leo hunched over the till, his fingers sorting currency with methodical slowness. I cross-referenced credit slips, the silence punctuated only by the refrigerator's drone and the faint electrical buzz overhead. Outside, the day's warmth had bled away, replaced by a chill that prompted the heating system to periodically sigh into life with a metallic pop. I glanced up, catching Leo's gaze flicker towards the hallway entrance to our left. He paused, head cocked, as if listening for a summons, then gave a slight shake and returned to his count. "All right?" I asked softly. A mumbled affirmation, something about fatigue, but the tension in his posture was palpable. It was then I registered it too, a faint, abrasive skitter originating near the kitchen, like a chair leg dragged unwillingly, briefly, across the wood. I froze, listening intently. Leo met my stare, his own count abandoned. "Did you hear that?" My whisper felt loud in the stillness. He nodded, setting down a stack of notes, and gestured wordlessly for me to follow. We moved toward the kitchen entrance, the floorboards announcing our cautious advance. A frantic drummer took up residence beneath my ribs. My palms grew damp. Uneven floor, I told myself. The building settling. Rational thoughts, flimsy shields against the deliberate quality of the sound. That short, sharp scrape, abruptly silenced. Inside the kitchen, normalcy reigned. Chairs tucked neatly beneath the small break table, refrigerators humming contentedly, counters wiped clean, the sink gleaming faintly. I exhaled, a shaky breath of relief. "Just the house," I murmured, turning back towards the front. And then, the laugh, not booming, not distant, but intimate, a low, rasping chuckle, seemingly materializing from the air inches away. It didn't echo, it simply was, present and chillingly real. Leo's eyes, when they met mine, were vast pools of reflected dim light and sheer astonishment. A cold wave surged down my spine as the fine hairs on my arms lifted. My stomach clenched. Male, female, impossible to discern, yet undeniably mocking, amused by our bewildered intrusion. Thought dissolved into pure instinct. I bolted. Leo pounded close behind. We scrambled for the front entrance, fumbled with our phones, and burst into the cool night air in a breathless 10-second exodus. My chest ached, starved for oxygen. Leo was already dialing, his voice tight as he spoke to the police dispatcher. Through the glass door, I stared back into the cafe's shattered interior, pierced by a few lonely lights. Darkness, stillness, my heart hammered against my ribs, threatening to splinter bone. Never had I heard anything so distinct, so undeniably close, in an utterly empty space. 15 minutes crawled by before the cruiser arrived. 2 officers emerged, their expressions professionally neutral as they listened to our fragmented account. The laughter, the certainty of being alone. Had anyone else possessed a key? Only the owner and one other manager, we confirmed, both long gone. Flashlights cutting beams through the interior dimness, they conducted a thorough sweep. Every room illuminated, every closet opened, every window latch checked. They even peered into the dusty attic crawl space above the kitchen. Nothing. No forced entry. No stray footprints disturbing the settled dust in the unused back rooms. The building was secure. They weren't dismissive, precisely, but the subtext was clear. Overwrought employees spooked by an old building's groans. Lock up, go home, call if anything else happens. The following morning, relating the incident felt strangely embarrassing. Yet silence was impossible in the close-knit ecosystem of the cafe staff. News propagated swiftly. A few nodded knowingly. Clara mentioned hearing voices near that same hallway before, though she'd blamed the wind. Others recounted similar fleeting oddities, usually dismissed. Finn, one of the baristas, had once sworn he saw a chair by the storage room shift on its own accord, a claim met with skepticism. Suddenly, Leo and I found ourselves reconsidering Finn's story. Maybe he hadn't been imagining things. In the subsequent weeks, Leo and I navigated several more closing shifts together. We feigned normalcy, but as 9 o'clock ticked past, that familiar knot of anxiety tightened in my chest. Small disturbances began to accumulate, defying easy explanation. Cups would inexplicably tumble from shelves, not once, but often enough to prompt inspections of the shelving and temperature, revealing nothing amiss. While tidying up, I'd catch faint whispers just behind me, sibilant sounds devoid of discernible words. Turn and find only empty air. A persistent sensation of being watched plagued me, particularly during solo trips to the pantry, a narrow, chilly alcove branching off that unsettling hallway. One evening, nearing closure, I lingered in the small back office, finishing paperwork. Leo was in the kitchen, consolidating leftovers and wiping surfaces. The rest of the team had departed. It had been a slow night. My office door stood ajar, offering a partial view of the corridor if I leaned back. Concentration proved elusive. My nerves were frayed, my gaze repeatedly flicking upwards. Then, a sound. A distinct tap on the wooden wall just outside the office. Not the random creak of pipes, but the deliberate rap of knuckles. Once. Pause. Twice. I rose, heart accelerating, and moved to the doorway, peering left, then right. The hallway stretched empty, bathed in the weak glow of an ancient fixture that deepened the shadows in the corners. "Leo?" My voice sounded thin. Silence. Louder this time. "Leo?" Still nothing. Hesitantly, I ventured down the corridor towards the corner, hiding the storage room entrance. The door was shut. From behind it, a faint rustling sound reached me. I grasped the cool metal doorknob, turning it cautiously. Locked. Peculiar. We rarely secured that door, needing access throughout the day. Feeling foolish, I knocked softly. "Leo?" No reply. The rustling ceased. As I started to turn away, Leo's voice sounded from behind me, drifting from the kitchen's direction. "You calling me?" I nearly leapt from my skin. Spinning around, I hissed for him to come quickly. Together, we tried the storage room door again. Firmly locked. We fumbled through our key rings. None fit. We hadn't locked it. Didn't even know which key belonged to it. Leo swore he hadn't touched the door all evening. We stood there, baffled, when the handle suddenly rattled violently. A quick, metallic jangle, as if someone on the other side were trying desperately to get out. My stomach plummeted. Tremors started in my hands. Leo's face blanched. He instinctively pulled me back a step. We stared, transfixed, at the knob, waiting for it to turn. Then, absolute silence descended once more. Leo reached out, gingerly testing the handle. Immovable. The urge to linger evaporated. We retreated from the hallway, switched off the necessary lights, secured the main entrance, and fled. Sleep offered little respite that night, the memory of the rattling doorknob replaying relentlessly A few days later, I recounted the escalating incidents to our manager, Ms. Evelyn. She listened patiently, then admitted, somewhat reluctantly, that previous staff members had resigned, citing discomfort within the building. The owner, she added, remained tight-lipped on the subject, though she harbored her own suspicions about the property's shadowed history. Spurred by this, Leo and I attempted some amateur research, scouring online archives and local history sites. We unearthed records of a family residing there in the late 19th century, but no documented tragedies, crimes, or accidents surfaced to explain the phenomena. A solitary local blog post hypothesized the house stood upon the foundations of an even older structure, but offered no concrete evidence. Work continued. The strange occurrences persisted, favoring the quiet hours, the solitary moments, the empty spaces. They seemed drawn, increasingly, to that corridor by the kitchen, the one leading to the pantry, the rattling storage room, and those two perpetually closed-off chambers. Staff began actively avoiding it when alone. Clara started requesting an escort whenever fetching supplies from back there, confessing to an oppressive feeling of being scrutinized each time she passed the hallway's entrance. One evening found Leo and I staying late again, compelled by the necessity of a thorough inventory count. Determinedly, we stuck together, clipboards in hand, moving through the silent building. The dining area lay shrouded in darkness, but we left lights burning in the kitchen and the corridor, a meager defense against the encroaching shadows. My pulse remained stubbornly elevated throughout. Every creak, every settling groan of the old house sent jolts of adrenaline through me. I kept anticipating the chilling chuckle, the phantom tapping. Leo was equally on edge, his gaze constantly sweeping corners, as if expecting an ambush. We completed the count without major incident. As we prepared to return to the front, a muffled voice emanated from near the pantry. We both froze. A single, indistinct word, low and guttural, like someone muttering under their breath. I took a hesitant step forward. The sound vanished. Pushing the pantry door open, I fumbled for the switch, flooding the small space with weak light. Shelves crammed with tins, coffee sacks, sugar bins, all appeared undisturbed. No one there. Leo crowded in behind me, staying close. We stood for a long moment, the only sounds our own shallow breathing, listening. Nothing. Turning to leave, something brushed distinctly against my leg. A fleeting pressure, a tug on my trousers. A startled yelp escaped me as I stumbled forward, colliding with Leo. He steadied me, his grip tight. "What?" he whispered urgently. "Something touched me," I stammered, whipping around, phone flashlight slicing through the dimness at floor level. Empty space. He believed me. He'd seen the jump, felt the tremor of my reaction. Enough. We agreed silently. Enough for one night. We locked up swiftly and departed into the comparative safety of the midnight street. And so, it continues. Sporadic incidents, days apart, sometimes weeks. A coworker reports a disembodied whisper. An object shifts inexplicably. No logic, no pattern, no explanation ever surfaces. I remain employed here. Necessity dictates, and a strange camaraderie has formed amongst us, forged in shared unease. Leo stays too, perhaps driven by a curiosity that outweighs his fear. We discuss leaving, sometimes seriously, but a shared stubbornness keeps us rooted for now. I still work within those walls. The building endures, unchanged, as do its spectral quirks. The owner maintains a studied ignorance. Some nights pass in uneventful quiet. On others, doors latch themselves. Faint voices echo from vacant rooms, or that low, chilling laugh drifts from the shadowed corridor. I've learned a kind of coping mechanism: heightened awareness, proximity to Leo whenever possible, a refusal to investigate bumps in the night. Yet, every time I approach that hallway, after hours, the familiar knot tightens in my gut. My muscles tense, my mouth goes dry. Sometimes a tremor runs through my hands, a cold prickle skittering along my arms. Explanation eludes me. Is it an elaborate prank? Echoes of a forgotten past? Something else entirely? I only know the visceral reality of those sounds, that cold touch against my skin, and the utter absence of rational cause. Leo knows it too. So do the others. We lock the doors, count the takings, and escape as quickly as decency allows. We don't linger. We don't tempt fate in the back rooms after dark. That's the uneasy truce we maintain. But the memory of that laugh, intimate and mocking in the empty kitchen, remains indelible. A constant reminder that some places hoard secrets impervious to reason. And with every creak and whisper in that old house, the question lingers: will I ever truly feel safe within its walls again? The house presented itself as an impossible bargain, a structure steeped in years, timbers groaning under the weight of secrets Silas hadn't yet deciphered. Its scent, that peculiar dry perfume of aged wood and settled dust, clung to the air, but the rent was a whisper of its worth. Such gifts demand little scrutiny when you crave sanctuary, a place to simply be. For a handful of days, tranquility reigned. Silence, deep and undisturbed, was his sole companion as he unpacked fragments of his life, coaxing warmth into the cool, empty rooms. No spectral whispers, no unsettling eyes from neighboring windows, only the solitary echo of his own existence within those walls. Then came the first fissure in the calm. While banishing grime from beneath the bathroom basin, Silas's fingers brushed against something nestled behind a cold, sweating pipe, a deliberate concealment. A scrap of paper, brittle and creased, emerged into the dim light. Scrawled upon it in a frantic, almost illegible hand were 3 words: "Be careful. He knows." A prickle of disquiet traced his spine, mingling with bafflement. Who was this nebulous he? What knowledge did he possess? Likely debris from a past occupant, Silas reasoned. A forgotten jest, a fragment of some private drama. He crushed the paper, its texture like dry skin, and consigned it to the bin. A peculiarity, nothing more. Days bled into one another, the memory of the note fading like old ink. The house began to embrace him, its shadows growing familiar, until, wrestling with the stiff door of a high kitchen cabinet, he uncovered the second missive. Affixed to the inner panel with desiccated tape, another ragged fragment bore the same spidery script, starker this time. He watches. This struck a deeper chord, a dissonant note in the house's quietude. The easy dismissal faltered. Prankster, lingering echo of tenants past. Yet, a chilling intimacy clung to the words, as if whispered directly into his ear. Silas ripped it down, the brittle tape snapping, and discarded it with the forced nonchalance he didn't feel. The seed of apprehension, once planted, began to root. An involuntary vigilance took hold. Cupboards were opened with bated breath. Drawers slid out with a tremor of anticipation. His searches yielded nothing for a time, a tense lull before the next discovery. Then, pushing the vacuum's nozzle into the shadowed realm beneath his bed, he felt it, the unmistakable texture of paper secured to the wooden slats. A cold fist clenched in his gut as he reached into the dust bunnies and darkness, peeling away the tape, the familiar ragged paper, the chaotic scrawl. Whatever you do, don't look for him. He sank to the floorboards, the note trembling in his hand. The flimsy veil of coincidence disintegrated. This was calculated, intimate. These messages weren't remnants. They were offerings, laid out along a path he was compelled to follow. Meant for Silas, but why? Who was this watcher he was warned against seeking? His home transformed into a cage of his own making. Every creak of the floorboards, every rustle of leaves beyond the glass became a potential footfall, a lurking presence. Windows were canvases for imagined silhouettes. Corners held unseen observers. Locks were tested, retested, a ritual against an intangible threat. The reassurances Silas fed himself, just scraps, just a game, were thin gruel against the gnawing certainty. Then, drifting on the edge of slumber one night, his hand slid beneath the pillow and encountered not soft linen, but the sharp edge of paper. His pulse leapt. This scrap felt different, cleaner, the paper less fatigued, almost new. The message it carried froze the blood in his veins. He waits until you're asleep. Bolting upright, the air knocked from his lungs. Silas scanned the oppressive darkness. This wasn't hidden. It was placed. Recently, while he was here, the violation was absolute. The sanctuary of his bed, his sleep, breached. Shadows writhed with possibility, the silence thick with unseen company. Darkness became intolerable. Sleep arrived only under the weak, judgmental glare of the bedside lamp, a futile ward against the unseen. Nightly patrols became routine, flashlight beam cutting through familiar spaces, probing closets, peering into crawl spaces, seeking confirmation of his solitude. Yet the intrusions persisted. The crescendo arrived after a day that had bled him dry. Dragging himself homeward, craving only oblivion, Silas entered his bedroom to find it waiting. Not tucked away, not hidden, but laid bare upon the duvet, stark against the fabric. A fresh sheet. The script, though still untidy, possessed a new, deliberate force. Large letters, heavy with implication. I know what you did. His breath hitched. Motion ceased. A chasm opened beneath him. What transgression! His life was unremarkable, his conscience clear. Yet the accusation lay there, bold and undeniable, a poisoned dart aimed directly at his core. Rooted to the spot, an icy dread seeped into his bones. This malevolent game, this psychological torture, who wielded it, and to what end? Flight beckoned, a siren call to abandon this haunted space. But a knot of defiance tightened within him. Silas wouldn't be chased from his own refuge. His countermove, a small digital eye, positioned to surveil the bed, to capture the phantom scribe. Days passed under its silent gaze. The recording showed only his own restless movements, the mundane rhythm of his life. A fragile hope flickered. Perhaps the tormentor had retreated. Then, settling into bed 2 nights later, his hand, seeking the cool underside of the pillow, discovered another violation. Tucked inside the pillowcase, a new note. Trembling fingers drew it forth, the familiar scrawl, but the pronoun had shifted, multiplied. "We saw you." Sleep was murdered that night. Silas lay rigid, adrift in a sea of amplified sound. The house sighed and settled around him, each groan a potential threat, the hallway clock ticking like a bomb counting down. Darkness pulsed with unseen energy. Repeated circuits of the house confirmed locked doors, secured windows, defenses against a foe who needed no entry. Dawn arrived, not as a relief, but as a signal. Enough. Survival instinct screamed louder than defiance. Possessions were thrown haphazardly into bags, a frantic exodus. Pausing at the threshold, kneading his shoes from beneath the bed, his hand brushed against one final chilling farewell. Paper. His stomach churned, but morbid curiosity, or perhaps a need for closure, compelled him to look. 3 words. A promise. Or a curse. "We'll be back." No hesitation remained. The note fell unheeded as Silas bolted, the house shrinking behind him, unobserved. Behind the wheel, tremors ran through his hands, his heart hammering against his ribs, a frantic drumbeat accompanying his flight from the incomprehensible. Miles dissolved beneath the tires until the structure was merely a fading stain in the rearview mirror. The identity of the watchers, the nature of their knowledge, the meaning behind their parting vow, these remain phantoms, unanswered questions echoing in the quiet spaces of his mind. Had unseen eyes followed his every move? Had spectral hands placed those missives while he slept or worked? Oblivion is a balm Silas seeks, yet cannot find. Sometimes, in the deep stillness of solitude, the icy tendrils of that remembered scrutiny return, coiling around his senses, and the question persists, a cold whisper in the dark. Are they still watching? Necessity, sharp and insistent, drove Elias Thorne to the threshold of the monolithic edifice shadowing the city's frayed edge. The night watch position promised little beyond solvency, a simple vigil within its 10-story husk from 10 till dawn. Sentinel duty in a cavernous lobby, ensuring the after-hours stillness remained undisturbed. A straightforward proposition, or so the quietude initially suggested. The building, though aged, possessed a formidable skeleton, its corridors stretching into perspectives that seemed designed to diminish anyone walking them. The inaugural shift unfolded in a vacuum of silence. Elias, stationed at the lobby's vast cold desk, found solace in the mundane rhythm of magazine pages turning, the cyclical sweep of camera feeds across vacant corridors. Fluorescent tubes droned their low hymn. The ancient structure groaned softly in its sleep, settling its bones. A couple of methodical patrols punctuated the hours, footsteps echoing down deserted hallways, door handles tested, beams of light probing the Stygian depths of empty rooms. Nothing stirred, nothing deviated. By dawn's tentative approach, Elias had concluded the tenure would be blessedly monotonous. But the quiet had teeth. It began subtly, insidious intrusions upon the norm, easily dismissed, until their cumulative weight pressed too heavily. The elevator became the locus of this burgeoning disquiet. Each night, precisely as the clock devoured 2 a.m., it would announce its arrival on the lobby floor with a resonant ping. Elias would look up instinctively, only to witness the vacant door slide open, pause as if awaiting an invisible passenger, then retreat upwards, summoned by an unseen hand. A phantom call, he reasoned, a quirk in the antiquated circuitry. One night, chafing against the inexplicable, Elias intercepted the phantom summons. He stepped into the waiting car, thumbing the button for the summit, determined to unmask the glitch. The doors sealed, and the mechanism shuddered, plunging sickeningly for a moment before catching with a jarring thud. Light stuttered, painting his face in strobes of anxiety, then steadied as the car ascended smoothly. Disgorged onto the 10th floor, he found only profound darkness, pierced by a distant exit sign's bloody glow. An alien stillness pressed in, thick and watchful. He scanned deserted office husks, shadows pooling in corners, feeling the trespass keenly, an intruder in a place that resented his presence. Retreating to the lift, relief warred with dread. As the door slid shut, a flicker at the hallway's vanishing point, a silhouette, stark against the gloom, instantly erased. Imagination, he told himself, fueled by fatigue. Yet the image seared itself behind his eyes. The subsequent nights were haunted by that fleeting shape. He wrestled with logic, dismissing it as sensory deception, the mind's projection onto darkness. Yet the elevator persisted in its strange, punctual ritual, the 2 a.m. arrival a nightly reminder. With each ping, the tendrils of unease tightened their grip. Later, patrolling the 5th floor's deserted expanse, Elias detected it, the soft, rhythmic cadence of footfalls overhead. He froze, pulse hammering against the silence, straining to hear. The hallway stretched before him, utterly empty, yet the sound continued, a steady pacing from somewhere above. He stood rooted, trying to triangulate the source. An empty office, perhaps. Breathing deeply, battling a rise in panic, he moved towards the stairwell. The sound amplified as he climbed, each concrete step feeling weighted, the air growing heavier, colder. Reaching the 8th landing, hand trembling on the door's cool metal, he listened. Silence. He pushed through into the frigid corridor, flashlight beam slicing the black. Empty offices stared back, glass eyes reflecting his light. Everything was inert, tomb still, but the conviction of being watched prickled his skin. As he turned to retreat, it came again, the distinct tap, 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 directly behind him. He whirled, beam cutting wildly through empty space. Nothing. Retreat became a frantic clatter down the concrete stairs, the echoes chasing him back to the lobby's deceptive sanctuary. He sank behind the desk, breath ragged, dismissing it, denying it, yet knowing the building held something else within its walls. The footfalls became a nightly torment, always distant, always on the upper levels, a subtle acoustic torture keeping him perpetually on edge. He clung to routine, forcing himself through the motions, but the building itself felt altered, imbued with a malevolent awareness. One night, adrift in the echoing quiet of his rounds, on the 9th floor, his light snagged it. Not a trick of vision, not a fleeting glimpse, but a presence solidified at the corridor's far reach, just beyond the beam's full illumination. A tall, slender darkness, vaguely man-shaped, absorbing the light. It stood impossibly still, radiating a palpable watchfulness. Elias recalled, breath catching, and the figure shifted, detaching itself from the deeper black, taking one slow, measured step towards him. Raw instinct screamed. He fled, the pounding of his own feet, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating silence, not daring a backward glance until the lobby lights offered their cold comfort. Whom could he tell? The narrative felt flimsy, the ravings of a solitary guard unnerved by shadows. Doubt warred with terror. The following night, he abandoned the rounds, a prisoner in the glass-walled lobby. His world shrank to the grid of monitors displaying silent, empty floors. 2 a.m. tolled. The elevator chimed, doors parting on the familiar void. Elias watched, transfixed. But his gaze snapped to the screen depicting the 10th floor. There, standing sentinel before the camera's unblinking eye, the shadow, motionless, observing the observer. A glacial dread seeped into Elias's bones, cold and paralyzing. The figure stirred, gliding forward with unnerving smoothness, growing larger in the frame, resolving from silhouette into something nightmarishly defined. It paused scant inches from the lens, filling the screen, and Elias saw its eyes, or absences where eyes should be. Twin voids radiating a chilling, possessive hunger that reached through the monitor, through the glass, directly into him. The connection, the knowing, in those empty sockets, shattered his paralysis. Elias scrambled from the chair, a strangled cry escaping his lips. He snatched his coat, bursting through the main doors into the indifferent city night, the building looming silent and vast at his back, a monolith guarding its terrible secret. He never returned. The resignation was filed before sunrise. The first occasion, I waved it off, a flicker at the periphery, nothing more than happenstance. The second, a tremor of paranoia, easily dismissed. Yet, by the third night, observing that same indistinct shape drifting behind me, along the familiar circuit of my nightly walk with Barnaby, a cold, sharp certainty pierced through denial. I was being followed. What remained terrifyingly obscure was how this unnerving, silent pursuit would spiral, dragging me into a vortex where my most intimate anxieties awaited confrontation. It began, as such things often do, steeped in the mundane. 10 o'clock sharp every evening, Barnaby, my lumbering, honey-furred retriever, and I would embark on our customary loop through the neighborhood. A placid enclave, this place, all meticulously clipped hedges and houses cast from identical molds, the kind of locale where disturbance seemed constitutionally impossible, or so the illusion held. Our path never deviated, down Hawthorne Lane, a left onto Sycamore Crescent, circling the shadowed expanse of the community green, then tracing Willow Way back to the sanctuary of home. A tranquil ritual, bathed in the sodium glow of street lamps, just Barnaby and me traversing a world surrendered to slumber. That first night, the sighting was negligible, a form melting into the distance at the street's far end, moving counter to our direction. Barely a conscious annotation, merely another soul embracing the nocturnal quiet. The second night brought a recurrence, same position, same hour. A fluke, I reasoned. Perhaps a night shift worker, unwinding post-labor. But the third night, Witnessing the figure pivot onto Sycamore Crescent precisely as Barnaby and I navigated the corner, disquietude began to coil, serpentine within my gut. My stride lengthened instinctively, Barnaby's leash taut in my grip. A furtive glance over my shoulder confirmed it. The silhouette remained, mirroring my accelerated pace. A frantic drumbeat commenced against my ribs. My fingers scrabbled in my pocket for my phone, a silent curse forming as the emptiness registered, left charging, plugged into the wall. Foolish, utterly foolish. How often had safety bulletins stressed the necessity of carrying it? We were approaching the green now, the lamp sparser, casting longer, more menacing shadows. The darkness felt palpable, pressing inward, each patch of obscurity a potential concealment. Barnaby, typically imperturbable, sensed the shift in my aura, emitting a low whine, his gaze questioning. "It's all right, boy," I murmured, the reassurance aimed more squarely at myself. Nearly there. Risking another backward look, I saw it was definitely a he, had gained ground, close enough now to discern vague attributes: tall, slender frame, entirely clad in black. A baseball cap cast his features into impenetrable shadow. Sheer panic detonated within me. Abandoning any semblance of composure, I broke into a full sprint. Barnaby, startled, barked sharply, galloping beside me, the sound swallowed by the unresponsive facades of the sleeping houses. No curtains twitched, no lights flared in inquiry. Footfalls echoed behind mine now, rapid, deliberate. He was running, chasing. That stark realization unleashed a fresh surge of ice-cold terror. I swerved violently from our established route, plunging through the manicured lawn of a stranger's property, a desperate gambit to break pursuit. Barnaby vaulted a low decorative fence ahead of me. I scrambled awkwardly after, denim snagging, tearing on the wood. Bursting onto an unfamiliar avenue, I gulped air, lungs burning. A fleeting moment of hope. Perhaps I'd lost him. Then the sound. Footsteps. Slower now. Measured, but undeniably present. Still coming. I ran again, direction irrelevant, driven solely by the primal need for distance. Houses smeared past in the gloom, indistinguishable variations on a theme. Lost, the horrifying awareness dawned, adrift in the very streets I called home. A sharp stitch pierced my side. Each inhalation felt like fire. This pace was unsustainable. Help, safety, a refuge, and then salvation flickered. A house aglow, windows spilling warm light into the oppressive dark. Someone was awake. Without a second thought, I veered up the driveway, hammering on the front door. "Help!" The cry tore from my raw throat. "Please, somebody help me." Seconds stretched into agonizing eternities. The pursuing footsteps drew nearer. Barnaby emitted a low growl, planting himself protectively between me and the street. Just as despair began to crystallize, the porch light blazed to life. The door swung inward, revealing a woman in her middle years, wrapped in a housecoat, her expression startled but compassionate. "Please," I gasped, the words tumbling out between ragged breaths. "Someone's chasing me. Let me in." A fractional hesitation, then she stepped back. I surged inside, Barnaby crowding at my heels, the door clicking shut, the deadbolt sliding home with reassuring finality. "What on earth happened?" she inquired, already reaching for her telephone. "Shall I phone the constabulary?" I nodded mutely, still fighting for equilibrium. While she relayed the situation, I risked a glance through the window's edge. The street outside lay deserted, utterly still under the artificial moonlight. The subsequent hour dissolved into a disorienting haze. Officers materialized, took my fractured account, conducted a sweep of the vicinity. They returned empty-handed. No trace of the man I described, no corroborating sign of a chase. "Are you quite certain, miss?" one constable queried, skepticism shading his tone. "It's awfully dark out. Shadows can play tricks, you know." A scream of frustration clawed at my throat. I knew the reality of the pursuit, the cold sweat, the pounding heart. Yet, insidious doubt began to seep in. Had I magnified a shadow, conjured a phantom from nocturnal anxieties? The kind woman, Agnes, she introduced herself, graciously offered refuge for the night, but an abrupt, overwhelming yearning for my own space, for the familiar, prompted my refusal. The police cruiser delivered me home, its officers performing a cursory check indoors before leaving me with a contact card and advice to report any further disturbances. As their taillights vanished, I secured my door, methodically verifying every lock, every window latch. Sleep proved elusive that night. I remained huddled on the sofa, Barnaby's solid weight a comforting pressure against my leg, starting violently at every creak and groan of the house settling. Dawn arrived not as a relief, but as a gray, exhausted surrender. I phoned in sick to my job, the prospect of venturing beyond the threshold utterly daunting. As the hours bled away, I wrestled with self-recrimination, trying to rationalize the terror as a byproduct of stress, an overactive imagination fueled by darkness. But as evening descended, dragging the appointed hour for Barnaby's walk with it, the familiar icy tendrils of fear began to constrict my chest. The mere thought of treading those same pavements sent sweat prickling onto my palms, my heart resuming its frantic tattoo. For the first time in Barnaby's life with me, his walk was forsaken. He whined plaintively at the door, bewildered by this rupture in our established rhythm, but the paralysis of fear held me fast. I let him into the enclosed backyard instead, my eyes scanning the perimeter ceaselessly from the kitchen window. The following night mirrored the first, and the night after that. Barnaby grew increasingly agitated, his restlessness a palpable weight on my conscience. Yet the fear remained absolute, insurmountable. It was temporary, I assured myself. Just a period of recovery needed after the shock. A week dissolved, then another. My existence contracted. Work became remote. Groceries materialized via delivery. My sole excursions were brief, hypervigilant trips to the backyard with Barnaby, my gaze constantly sweeping the fence line, searching for any anomaly, any hint of observation. Friends' calls went unanswered or were met with flimsy excuses, a lingering illness, a sudden family matter, anything but the stark admission that I had become a voluntary inmate in my own home, besieged by an apprehension I couldn't definitively prove was ever real. It was Barnaby, ultimately, who shattered the stalemate. 3 weeks to the day after that nightmarish pursuit, he planted himself resolutely by the front door, refusing the backyard, whining with heart-wrenching persistence, his leash dangling expectantly from his mouth. His deep, soulful eyes met mine, brimming with a confusion that bordered on accusation, yet threaded with unwavering hope. I stood there, hand hovering over the doorknob, for what felt like an age. My palm was slick, my pulse a frantic hammering in my ears, but his silent plea resonated deeper than the fear. I couldn't perpetually fail him. I couldn't surrender my life indefinitely to this amorphous dread. Drawing a breath that felt scraped from the very bottom of my lungs, I twisted the knob and pulled the door open. The cool night air brushed my face, a momentary shock that almost sent me recoiling back into the perceived safety within. But Barnaby's joyous bark propelled me forward, one step onto the porch, then another onto the path. Before conscious thought fully caught up, we were standing at the edge of the driveway. My gaze swept the length of the street. Vacant houses, silent sidewalks, no lurking silhouette materializing from the gloaming. Tentatively, hesitantly, we commenced the old route. Each rustle of unseen leaves, each distant hum of an engine drew my nerves taut as wire. Yet, as we progressed, as the familiar cadence of our steps reasserted itself, and no threat emerged from the deepening twilight, a measure of tension began to bleed away. The commonplace sights and sounds of the neighborhood, once symbols of a violated peace, slowly began to weave their quiet, restorative spell. We were nearing the community green when I saw him, a man, tall, lean, dressed in dark clothing, walking directly towards us. My breath hitched, lodging painfully in my throat. I froze mid-stride, the cold grip of remembered terror instantly returning. But as he drew nearer, illuminated more clearly by a proximate streetlight, recognition dawned. This wasn't the figure from my nightmares. This was Mr. Henderson from 3 houses down, embarking on his own evening constitutional. He offered a neighborly wave as he passed. I managed a shaky, uncertain smile in return. Completing the loop, heading back towards the sanctuary of home, I felt a profound internal shift. The fear hadn't vanished entirely. It lingered, a low thrum beneath the surface of awareness, but its dominion was broken. I had confronted it, stepped deliberately into the night despite its chilling presence, and I had endured. The path forward wouldn't be effortless, I understood. There would be nights when shadows danced with malevolent intent, when innocuous sounds sent adrenaline coursing through my veins. But I also recognized, with newfound clarity, that I could not permit fear to be the final arbiter. I could not allow one night of profound terror to indefinitely circumscribe my existence. As I turned the key in my front door, Barnaby's tail executing happy arcs beside me, I forged a silent compact with myself. Vigilance, yes, but tempered with courage. I would reclaim my freedom, my routine, my tranquility, one deliberate step, one measured walk at a time, until the night ceased to be a landscape of dread. Because the truest victory I was beginning to grasp lies not in the absence of fear, but in the quiet, determined act of moving forward even when trembling. And tonight, for the first time in weeks, I had taken that essential reclaiming step. This particular sanctuary found me through the digital ether, a stark, text-only advertisement promising quietude. I surveyed the space, signed the documents within the hour, The relentless thrum of neighboring lives, the ceaseless distractions of my previous existence had worn me thin. Here, I perceived a haven, a necessary void. It presented itself as immaculate, its scent neutral, the building itself a monument to the mundane. No jarring hues assaulted the eyes in the corridors. No eccentric artifacts hinted at personality. Everything whispered normalcy, a blessed monotony I craved. That initial impression, however, proved ephemeral. Move-in day dawned on a Saturday. My worldly possessions were skeletal. A divan, a narrow bed, one solitary table flanked by 2 chairs. Utensils clattered sparsely in a box. Clothing filled a few more. I wrestled everything up the stairs myself, the notion of hired hands feeling like an intrusion. The apartment unfolded as a constricted living area, bleeding into a functional kitchenette, a sleeping alcove barely deserving the name, bedroom, and a compact washroom. From the living space, the street observed. From the kitchen, a stoic brick wall stared back, a standard configuration draped in flat white paint, illuminated by a single naked bulb in the passage. Ornamentation held no appeal. I sought only slumber, deep and undisturbed. Daylight hours passed benignly. Belongings found temporary homes. Sockets were tested. The refrigerator hummed to life. The shower yielded gratifyingly hot water. I strained my ears, listening for the inevitable intrusions of neighbors. Muffled conversations drifted from below. The cadence of footsteps echoed from above. Nothing alarming. A tentative peace settled. Dinner was consumed early, followed by an evening adrift on the couch, scrolling through the digital flotsam on my phone. Calmness reigned. As midnight approached, drowsiness claimed me. I retired, anticipating nothing beyond the ordinary. That first night elapsed without incident, leaving only the faint stiffness of an unfamiliar mattress. Sunday invited exploration. I ambled through the vicinity, discovering a small provision shop, a modest diner, a laundromat tucked away on the adjacent block. An atmosphere of quietude pervaded the streets, lined with dormant vehicles and punctuated by the occasional dog walker. The weather was temperate, the sun unobtrusive. A sense of rightness bloomed. This placid enclave, this insulation from demands, felt precisely calibrated to my needs. Returning in the afternoon, I fashioned a quick meal, then positioned the television directly on the living room floor, lacking a proper stand. It flickered to life, cycling through new segments and some vapid reality program. As dusk deepened, the looming necessity of Monday's early start prompted me to extinguish the screen, attend to dental hygiene, and seek my bed. It was during that second night's ablutions that the peculiarity began. Conversing quietly with my reflection, a habit, murmuring reminders like lunch packed or alarm at 6, I detected a faint resonance. So subtle, I nearly dismissed it as phantom. Yet it wasn't a typical echo. A distinct lag separated my utterance from its repetition, which arrived muffled, as if filtered through cloth. I stilled, listening intently. Silence answered. Shrugging it off as idiosyncratic plumbing or hallway acoustics, I doused the bathroom light and retreated to the bedroom. Monday morning saw me depart at dawn for a day steeped in unremarkable tasks. I returned near 7 in the evening, feet aching, shoulders clenched with tension. The agenda was simple: swift dinner, shower, oblivion. I heated a pre-packaged meal, consumed it standing in the kitchen, disposed of the container. Then, the shower. Hot water cascaded, steam bloomed. The pipes offered their usual groans. As I rinsed, idly cataloging the next day's duties aloud, the echo resurfaced. It demanded concentration, barely audible above the water's hiss. Initially, it mimicked fragments of my speech, but with a decelerated rhythm. Then it shifted. Instead of mirroring my words, it offered something else. A whisper, nearly indecipherable, yet unnervingly like my own voice, pitched lower, imbued with a strange, halting quality. I cut the water flow, stood dripping, heart thudding against my ribs. The bathroom fell silent, save for the rhythmic plink of a lingering drop from the faucet. I waited. Nothing. Fatigue, I reasoned. Auditory tricks of tired plumbing. I toweled off, dressed, willed the incident from my mind. Later, lying in bed, eyes fixed on the shadowed ceiling, unease coiled within me. The apartment lay submerged in darkness, street lamp glow, etching faint outlines of furniture in the living room. Sleep remained elusive. Then, a soft, distant sound, my own name, called as if from afar. I bolted upright, flicked on the bedside lamp, ears straining. Only the frantic pulse in my own head answered. A hypnagogic hallucination, surely. I forced myself back down. Tuesday morning brought a dull headache. Painkillers, rapid coffee, departure. The workday was a slog. My thoughts snagged on the echo. Its inexplicability gnawed at me. Returning home at the usual hour, I deposited my belongings, assembled a perfunctory sandwich, attempted television. Restlessness prickled. I began to pace. In the bathroom, lights off, I spoke into the dimness. "Hello." Expecting some faint reply, I received only silence. I moved to the hallway, tried again. My voice bounced back normally from the narrow confines. I held my breath. Still no aberrant resonance. A flicker of relief, instantly extinguished. Behind me, a low susurration, barely registering. I spun around. The hallway stretched empty. Yet, the air had turned cold, raising goose flesh on my arms, prickling the nape of my neck. I killed the hallway light, retreating to the living room, chiding myself for succumbing to self-generated phantoms. Nightfall amplified the tension. Relaxation was impossible. I cracked the living room window, admitting a sliver of cool air. The street outside offered only the occasional passing car. Closing it after a moment, I sank onto the couch, seeking refuge in mobile games. Perhaps half an hour elapsed before a flicker in my peripheral vision, a shadow deepening, shifting near the kitchen threshold. I surged to my feet, lunged for the kitchen switch. Light flooded the space. Empty. My heart hammered, adrenaline singing in my veins. Imagination, surely. A trick of light, though no reflective surface presented itself as the culprit. Bed beckoned as the only escape. Before retreating, I declared aloud, "I'm done with this." The response came instantly. The echo repeated, "Done with this," drawing out the syllables, tinged with mockery. I froze, throat constricting, fingertips tingling. Backing away, I stared at the innocuous white drywall. Pressing my ear against it, I felt a faint vibration, sluggish, rhythmic, like a languid heartbeat. I recoiled, phone nearly slipping from my grasp. I fled to the bedroom, shutting the door firmly behind me. The shaking wouldn't stop. Burrowed under the covers, I listened. Silence held for several minutes. Then, emanating from the wall behind my headboard, a soft thump, thump, a dull, metronomic pulse. My chest tightened. Breath grew shallow. I rolled to the far side of the bed, seeking distance. Was it real? My imagination conjuring phantom heartbeats from the building's bones. Placing a hand flat against the cool plaster revealed nothing. Yet, pressing my ear close, confirmed it. A gentle, insistent thumping from within. I sat up, pulling away. Sleep was a distant shore. Hours passed in vigilant wakefulness until exhaustion finally dragged me under. The following morning, the urge to call in sick was potent, but practicality prevailed. Money was essential. Absenteeism frowned upon. My mind remained a frantic loop, replaying the echo. Acoustic anomaly, hidden microphone. During my lunch break, I considered researching online, but recoiled from the absurdity. What search terms? My apartment mimics me incorrectly. It sounded like nascent madness. After work, a stop at the convenience store felt like a necessary delay tactic. Returning to the apartment required conscious effort. The moment I crossed the threshold, the familiar sense of being observed settled upon me. The living room's overhead light flickered once, then held steady. Stale air clung heavily. I deposited the groceries in the kitchen, then turned, forcing calm. The room appeared unchanged. Dust motes danced in the light. The couch sat impassively. The television screen remained dark. Nothing overtly amiss, yet my pulse raced. I decided on a systematic tactile survey. Walking the perimeter, I pressed my ear to each wall. Living room, inert. Kitchen, silent. The hallway, however, midway down its length, a subtle vibration hummed against my skin. Placing my palms flat, the sensation intensified. A soft, rhythmic pulsing. I snatched my hands back. Tentatively, I spoke. Hello? A beat of silence. Then my voice returned, muted, from the hallway's far end. Hello, it echoed, elongated, raspy. I scrambled back into the living room, heart clamoring. Minutes later, I dialed the landlord. Voicemail. I left a message, inquiring vaguely about the building's structure, my voice betraying a tremor I couldn't suppress. No mention of echoes. Sanity felt fragile enough. I requested a call back at his convenience, hung up, and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the silent phone. The urge to contact someone, anyone, was strong, but I was adrift in this city. Colleagues, mere acquaintances. Explaining this, it felt impossible, isolating. That night, I attempted sleep on the couch, the television murmuring on low volume, its pale light a flimsy shield against the dark. I drifted, only to be jolted awake by a voice issuing from the speakers. Not the program I'd left on, but crackling static, and woven through it, my own voice, repeating my name. Elias. Elias. I lunged for the remote, silencing the set. The static died. The room plunged back into silence, broken only by my ragged breathing. Chest tight, I switched on the lamp, its sudden glare momentarily blinding. I scanned the corners, expecting something. Nothing. I sat, rubbing my eyes, fighting for equilibrium. Then, from the hallway, the echo spoke again. Softly, insistently, the words indistinct, like a quiet, trembling version of myself, seeking attention. teeth clenched. I tried to ignore it. Failed. Resolve hardening, I walked slowly into the corridor. The overhead light flickered again. I stood midway, bathroom door to one side, bedroom to the other. "Who's there?" My voice, loud in the confined space, reverberated. A pause, then the reply. "Who's there?" But distorted, gurgling. Nausea churned. Sweat beaded on my forehead. I whispered, "Stop." The echo answered, "Stop." Flat, guttural. My palms were slick, my mouth desert dry. Stepping forward, I reached out, touched the wall. The slow pulse met my fingertips, faint but undeniable. I jerked my hand back as if burned. I retreated to the bedroom, slammed the door, turned the lock. A futile gesture, I knew, but a necessary ritual. I sank onto the bed, breath coming in harsh gasps. Darkness pressed in. I switched on the bedside lamp. Its weak yellow glow illuminated rumpled sheets, a pile of clothes. I waited. The walls remained quiet for a long moment. Then, behind the headboard, the gentle thumping resumed. Palms pressed against my ears. I tried to block it out. My stomach knotted. Tremors ran through me. Eventually, I retrieved a flashlight from the closet. Approaching the wall, I swept the beam across its surface, searching for imperfection. Cracks, vents, panels, nothing but smooth, painted plaster. I tapped it gently. Hollow. Crouching, I pressed my ear near the baseboard. The pulse persisted, faint but steady, seemingly originating deep within the structure. I stood, dizzy, head pounding. Switching off the flashlight, I collapsed onto the bed. I remained awake until dawn, caught in a cycle of anxious dozing and abrupt awakenings, punctuated by faint murmurs that seemed to emanate from the very fabric of the apartment. The place felt sentient, a thought I desperately tried to suppress. Sunlight filtering through the curtains signaled the time for work. Exhaustion clung to me like a shroud. Eyes gritty, legs unsteady, I moved through the living room, noting the disarray of blankets on the couch. The air felt thick, stagnant. Keys in hand, I exited the apartment, locking the door behind me. In the stairwell, a wave of profound relief washed over me. At work, my phone remained stubbornly silent. No call from the landlord. As the day waned, the prospect of returning filled me with visceral dread. I lingered, tidying non-existent messes, engaging in pointless chatter. Finally, excuses exhausted, I drove home, slowly, stomach twisting. Outside the building, I paused, gazing up at the windows. My apartment remained dark, offering no clue to the vigil it kept. A deep breath, then entry. The communal hallway hummed under buzzing fluorescent lights. I unlocked my door, stepped inside. The stale air enveloped me like a shroud. My bag dropped by the couch as I scanned the living room. Unchanged, I flipped the overhead switch. It stayed lit. No flicker. A slow exhale. For a moment, the walls were silent. Cautiously, I took a few steps toward the bedroom. That's when it spoke, unprompted. "I'm here." I froze, hand clamped around my phone, heart seizing. The voice originated somewhere near the hallway, disembodied. I swallowed, fighting for composure. Response felt impossible. Mouth dry, throat tight. I backed toward the kitchen, needing water, needing to ground myself. The faucet groaned, water trickling out. I splashed my face. Then, the voice again, from the living room. Now. Face. Me. The words fractured, trembling. Gripping the sink's edge, I watched the water flow, pulse frantic. I turned off the tap, filled a glass, my hand shaking so badly, water sloshed onto the floor. I drank, set the glass down, tried to formulate a plan. Creeping back into the living room, the light buzzing softly overhead, I managed a shaky query. "Why are you here?" My words echoed normally, but the answer emanated from the far corner, a low whisper, my own voice, twisted. "Here. Why?" My stomach lurched. A full body tremor took hold. Flight screamed through my veins, yet I felt rooted to the spot. Slowly, I approached the corner, just two blank walls meeting. Reaching out, I touched the intersection. Cold paint met my tingling fingertips. Behind the plaster, the soft pulse throbbed. Breath hitched, I pulled back, retreating to the room's center, struggling to regulate my heartbeat. Sweat trickled down my temples, my shirt clinging damply to my back. Decision made. A cheap motel tonight. This was untenable. I grabbed a small duffel from the closet, hastily stuffing clothes inside. As I zipped the bag, the echo whispered my name again. Elias, drawing out the syllables, tasting them. Jaw clenched, I ignored it. Bag slung over my shoulder, I walked to the door, hand reaching for the knob. "Don't go," it pleaded. My own voice, laced with a desperate quiver. I wrenched the door open without looking back, stepped into the hallway, locked the apartment, and fled down the stairs, hands trembling violently, heart hammering against my ribs as if trying to escape. In my car, I drove, leaving the apartment lights burning, a trivial expense against the overwhelming need for distance. The motel room that night was a sterile box, offering a mixture of relief and residual dread. My body remained rigid, sleep shallow, and fraught. I kept listening, expecting the echo to follow, but the thin walls transmitted only the mundane sounds of neighboring guests. Shaky, yet marginally calmer, I knew this wasn't over. For now, I existed in this borrowed quiet, haunted by the memory of a voice that wore my own, speaking words I could neither comprehend nor control. Derelict structures, forgotten by time, resonate with a peculiar disquiet within me. Perhaps it's the echo of lives abruptly halted, sealed within decaying walls. So, when I stumbled upon the skeletal cabin deep within the woods, I recognized the familiar, dangerous siren song of the unknown, even as every rational thought screamed retreat. Curiosity, that treacherous guide, had already taken hold. My solitary trek had veered from the marked trail, drawn down a barely discernible ribbon of earth being slowly reclaimed by the wilderness. It was a flawless autumn day, the air sharp as cider, leaves exploding in brittle applause underfoot. I hadn't intended to stray, imagining perhaps an old hunter's track or forgotten logging trace that would loop conveniently back, but the forest deepened around me. The path descended, and silence descended with it. Birdsong ceased, replaced by a profound hush that felt less like peace and more like held breath. Trees soared, their interlaced branches weaving a dense ceiling that throttled the sunlight, casting the way ahead in long, wavering bands of shadow. Then, materializing from the gloom as if coalescing from the stillness itself. I saw it. The cabin slumped between ancient trunks, half swallowed by creeping vines and shadow. Its roof bowed precariously, its timber walls, bleached gray by countless seasons, wept moss. A vacant window stared like a hollow eye socket, allowing the wind to whisper through its broken panes, rattling loose boards in a lonely percussion. I stopped, an involuntary shiver tracing its way up my spine. This place felt fundamentally wrong. It wasn't merely the advanced decay, the sense of being utterly consumed by the wild. It was an atmosphere, a palpable weight that seemed to emanate from the structure, heavy and watchful. The woods themselves felt complicit, leaning closer. An old hunting shack, I reasoned, abandoned decades ago. Yet the apprehension coiling in my gut refused to yield. For long minutes I stood motionless, caught in the tension between self-preservation and that insistent magnetic pull. Every sensible fiber urged me back toward the known trail, toward the fading sunlight, but another current, deeper and more primal, nudged me onward. What did I expect to unearth? Forgotten tools? A clue to vanished lives? Or was it simply the lure of the forbidden, a break from the hike's gentle monotony? Regardless, my feet were already moving, crunching softly over the leaf litter, closing the distance. Up close, its decrepitude was absolute. The door sagged on tormented hinges, barely tethered to its frame. Steps leading to the meager porch had surrendered to rot. Through warped planking, I glimpsed an interior steeped in shadow, darkness clinging possessively to the corners. Drawing a steadying breath, I mounted the groaning porch. The wood complained loudly under my weight, the sound startling in the pervasive quiet. A final hesitation, then my hand reached out, pushing the door inward. It swung open with a desolate groan, revealing a single, desolate room. Dust lay thick as velvet snow, disturbed only by dry leaves that had skidded inside. What little furniture remained lay broken, draped in cobwebs like funereal shrouds. A table listed drunkenly, one leg fractured. A solitary chair lay toppled, suggesting a sudden, frantic departure. I stepped across the threshold, the air instantly colder, thick with the cloying perfume of damp wood and slow decay, a chill that seemed preserved within the very walls. My breath plumed, a fleeting ghost in the stagnant gloom, as my boots left clear prints in the undisturbed dust. There was little to see. Besides the broken furniture, only a few rusted implements lay scattered, and the corroded husk of a lantern hung near the doorframe. Yet an unsettling sense permeated the stillness. Not just emptiness, but a watched emptiness. Despite the patina of years, a phantom presence lingered, incongruous. My gaze drifted across the dust-furred floorboards toward the far corner, and that's when I saw them, stark against the gray canvas. Footprints. Not mine. I hadn't ventured to that side. Impossibly distinct, the edges sharp, disrupting the ancient dust as if made only moments before my arrival. They led from the shadowed corner directly toward the doorway I now occupied, then simply vanished. I froze, my heart becoming a frantic drum against my ribs. Scanning the room again, shadows suddenly seemed deeper, potentially concealing, but I was alone. Just as I recoiled, a sudden squall shrieked through the fractured window pane, rattling the loose door frame like skeletal fingers. The air thickened, and then, beneath the wind's moan, a counterpoint, a delicate, rhythmic tap-tap-tapping. Faint at first, easily dismissed as the wind whirring a loose branch outside. But it persisted, swelling subtly, finding a steady, deliberate cadence. It wasn't the wind. It resonated from below, vibrating upward through the very planks beneath my feet. A measured, insistent summons from the earth itself. Raw terror clamped down, visceral and absolute. Retreat became flight. I stumbled backward, heart hammering, bursting through the groaning doorway onto the porch, just as the wind howled anew, clawing at the trees until the branches writhed like tormented limbs. I plunged into the overgrown path, lungs burning, legs churning, refusing the urge to glance back at the shadowed edifice dissolving into the trees behind me. Yet the sound pursued, that infernal, rhythmic knocking, echoing not just in the turbulent forest, but reverberating inside my skull. I didn't cease my headlong flight until the familiar shape of my car emerged through the trees, parked innocuously on the gravel verge, miles, it seemed, from that hidden place. My hands trembled violently as I fumbled for the keys. Inside, doors locked, engine roaring, I sped away, the forest shrinking into a dark smudge in the rearview mirror. Days melt into weeks, but the memory of that cabin remains sharp and cold. The question persists: who or what was sequestered beneath those decaying floorboards? An animal trapped in the crawl space, a trick of acoustics and an overstimulated mind. Deep down, a colder certainty prevails. Something was indeed present, waiting in the dark beneath the cabin, and it was knocking. Its genesis remains indistinct in memory, a tremor just skirting the edge of awareness. Perhaps dusk had settled, though more likely the dead hours near to had claimed the city. Elias, newly returned from a draining late shift, had surrendered to his armchair, synapses firing too wildly for sleep, limbs too leaden for purpose. A subterranean thrum vibrated through his apartment, the kind audible only in absolute stillness. He hovered on the cusp of that gray half-slumber when a delicate resonance touched his front door. Gossamer light at first, like phantom fingertips tracing the grain, it mutated into a sequence of muffled concussions, deliberate and widely spaced. He straightened, pulse a frantic drum against his ribs, ears straining into the quiet. No voices bled through the walls, no footfalls echoed, only that soft, insistent percussion persisted. The cramped artery of his hallway seemed to constrict. Above, the bare bulb hummed, bathing peeling damask wallpaper and scarred floorboards in a jaundiced, uncertain light. This tenement pile groaned with age, its nocturnal creaks and groans familiar companions. But this felt directed, personal. Minutes stretched taut before Elias rose, his shirt clinging damply to his spine. A cold sweat, he realized. Pressing his ear flat against the cool wood yielded nothing. He gripped the tarnished brass knob, inhaled sharply, and wrenched the door inward, hoping surprise might reveal his tormentor. Vacancy. Only the corridor unspooled left and right, a shared vein connecting the row of anonymous doors, swallowed by shadow, save for a lone, distant bulb near the stairwell. Beside the stairs hung an incongruous mirror, property of the building, its frame baroque and chipped, the silvered glass perpetually filmed with a faint nebula of dust. No soul resided there. Elias edged out, craning his neck around the bend. Still nothing. He retreated, slammed the door, the deadbolt clicking home with metallic finality, and commanded himself to breathe. Sleep, that night, was a skittish creature, easily startled. Had he dreamt it? Fatigue played tricks, and the gnawing anxiety over dwindling funds certainly didn't help. This apartment, a supposed stepping stone, a cheap haven while he regained footing after the job loss, had become a mire. Months had bled into more months, perhaps too many. It felt less like shelter, more like a cage. Neighbors were transient specters, their greetings rare, their presence questionable. Sometimes he wondered if he inhabited the floor alone, insulated by thick, sound-deadening walls that rarely relayed the comforting noises of life. The following night held its peace. The one after, silence reigned. Just as the memory began to fray, blurring into a stress-induced hallucination, he jolted awake near the 2 o'clock chime. That same vibration shivered through the floorboards, a tentative tapping, escalating to something denser, a heavy knock swaddled in cloth. He sprang from bed, heart clawing its way up his throat. This time, caution prevailed. Ear pressed tight, the wood felt glacial against his cheek. Was that breathing, shallow, ragged, or merely the ancient plumbing sighing in the walls? Then came a friction, a scuffing, as if something heavy were being dragged back and forth just beyond the threshold. Slow, rhythmic, shuffling steps. His chest seized. He recoiled, hand hovering near the lock, frozen for what felt like an eternity. Eventually, the sound ceased. Adrenaline roaring in his ears, he flung the door wide. The corridor gaped, empty. Same weak light, same profound hush. His gaze snagged on the mirror. In its clouded depths, his own reflection stared back, pallid and unnerved, but solitary. Nothing. Absolutely nothing. He rationalized. Stress, a prank, perhaps a drunken neighbor fumbling for the wrong door. Yet it persisted, night after night, tethered to that spectral hour around 2. With each recurrence, a sliver of courage, or perhaps desperation to unravel the enigma, grew. He began to linger longer, ear cemented to the wood, breath held captive in his lungs, waiting. That's when the whispers began. Or were they moans? Elusive, barely audible, yet undeniably human. Faint expirations, guttural sighs, like someone wrestling a great weight mere inches away. The doorknob would jitter softly. Sometimes, a faint, kittenous clicking, like fingernails scraping delicately across the panel. His body betrayed him. Sweat bloomed cold, hands quaked, mouth turned to dust. And each time, the denouement remained unchanged. He'd opened the door to an empty stage. His investigations became meticulous. No fresh impressions marred the threadbare runner carpeting the hall. No adjacent doors stood ajar. No windows offered ingress or egress at this end of the building. Only that accursed mirror waited patiently at the corridor's terminus, doubling the emptiness, reflecting Elias pacing, a man haunted by absence. Days bled into weeks. He tried mundane defenses. A chair wedged beneath the knob yielded nothing by morning. Leaving interior lights ablaze offered no deterrence. The knocking, the shuffling, the proximate breathing, they continued their nightly ritual. The thought of fleeing solidified, but funds remained stubbornly low, the initial deposit having bled his savings dry. He was anchored here, cornered in this stale, musty box. One quiet evening, seeking refuge in distraction, Elias sifted through a cache of old letters discovered in a drawer, relics of a previous tenant. Yellowed paper, faded ink, decades old, mundane grievances mostly, repairs needed, complaints about drafts, and a casual mention of the corridor mirror. A single sentence snagged his attention, sending an icy tendril creeping up his spine. That looking glass at the hole's end still gives me the shivers. Swear, sometimes I catch movement in it when nobody's there. A forgotten voice echoing his fear across the years. It wasn't comforting. He resolved to confront it. That night, he didn't wait in bed. He sat on the floor, spine pressed against the hallway wall, beside the door, a sentinel in the dark. Around 2, it started. The familiar gentle vibration against the wood, the soft rattle of the knob. He squeezed his eyes shut, held his breath, listening. A muffled groan reached him, thick with effort, perhaps pain. His stomach clenched. Ignoring the frantic pulse hammering against his eardrums, he leaned closer. A dragging sound, fabric on wood, or maybe something heavier, flesh on concrete. He pictured someone crawling out there, pressing their face close to the barrier. His hand, trembling violently, reached for the knob, steeled to act. But before his fingers made contact, the hinges whined. The door, under its own volition, began to edge inward. A crack appeared, a sliver of the corridor's sickly light slicing into his apartment's gloom. Elias froze, fingers suspended inches from the knob, caught between slamming it shut and throwing it wide. The wood groaned again, a soft, yielding sound, as if nudged from the other side. Peering through the narrow aperture revealed nothing, no form, no shadow. He could see the distant mirror's reflection. His breath hitched. Something was wrong with the reflection. The corridor it showed seemed subtly altered, the light dimmer, the angles skewed, distorted. He pulled the door fully open. The physical space outside remained unchanged, vacant. Yet the door continued its slow, inward drift, hinges protesting, propelled by an unseen force. He stumbled back, equilibrium deserting him. His pulse stuttered. Sweat burned his eyes. A scream built in his chest, but he choked it down, knowing instinctively it would be useless, that neighbors wouldn't stir, wouldn't believe, or worse, weren't even there to hear. The presence, whatever it was, respected the threshold. It seemed content to display the empty corridor, a silent taunt, an unspoken dare. Step out, come closer, meet me where I stand. His legs felt like waterlogged reeds, yet he forced himself forward, planting his feet in the doorway, half in, half out. The air in the hall hung thick and stale, smelling of old timber and damp decay. The mirror beckoned. Its surface remained dull, yet he saw it, a flicker within its depths, something moving behind him inside his apartment. He spun around, heart seizing. Only his own dim, cluttered living space met his gaze. Turning back, the mirror showed only his reflection, stark, anxious, hollow-eyed, but the angle seemed wrong. His shoulders in the glass looked unnaturally hunched, braced against an invisible weight. He swallowed, the sound loud in the silence, and retreated, slamming the door shut. If it wanted him to wander its domain, it would have to wait. Inaction, he knew, was a fool's comfort. Sleep was now impossible. He paced, checking the lock obsessively. Landlord? Police? What could he possibly articulate? My door is possessed by a sound. Dismissal was certain. This entity, whatever its nature, wouldn't perform for an audience. This was a private torment. He felt ensnared in a game with unknowable rules. The next morning, driven by a primal need for insulation, he taped over the peephole, wrestled a heavy bookcase against the door, and draped a thick blanket over it, flimsy talismans against the intangible. That evening, seeking answers, he returned to the old letters. A slip of brittle paper, previously overlooked, fluttered from behind the drawer lining. A hasty scrawl. Don't look into its reflection. It needs you to see it. His hand shook violently as he read it again. Whose warning? It didn't matter. It confirmed the mirror's role. The chilling suspicion that it wasn't merely observing, but luring. Night fell. The knocking returned, featherlight at first, then gaining insistence. Elias huddled behind the bookcase, a useless barricade. The door rattled in its frame, hinges emitting thin shrieks. He pressed his palm flat against the wood, feeling the vibrations pulse up his arm. He knew it could open again. His temples pounded. Sweat traced cold paths down his back. Each breath was a ragged, shallow thing. The fear intensified, sharpened by the suggestion of malignant intent, of something waiting, needing acknowledgement. Then abruptly, the vibration ceased. He held his breath, listening into the void. Silence stretched. He risked shifting the bookcase, just enough to peer through the crack. The door stood solid, closed. Curiosity warred with terror. He leaned his ear against the wood one last time. His heart hammered against his ribs. For a long moment, nothing. Then, a scratch. Soft, distinct, deliberate. His entire body went rigid. The handle jiggled, and before thought could translate to action, the door swung inward a few inches, silently, smoothly, all on its own. His throat constricted. There was no choice. Now, face it, or lose his sanity completely. Pushing the door wide, he stepped into the corridor, legs trembling beneath him. The hallway felt charged, pregnant with unseen tension, though utterly empty. At the far end, the mirror waited, a tarnished eye in the gloom. His footsteps were swallowed by the silence. He advanced, drawn forward, until he stood mere feet from the glass. The air tasted metallic, with fear. He forced himself to look. Nothing stood beside him. No lurking shape haunted the periphery. Yet, as he stared into his own reflected eyes, he saw them shift. A fractional movement, independent of his own gaze, as if the image lagged or led. His reflection seemed frozen, its mouth slightly agape, poised on the verge of utterance. A violent shudder racked his frame. He backed away, tearing his gaze from the glass, refusing its silent invitation. He scrambled back into his apartment, slammed the door, shot the bolt, and shoved the bookcase back with frantic strength. Now, sleep is a forgotten country. Elias sits bathed in the sterile glare of every light bulb, heart a runaway engine in his chest. His skin prickles with a constant, heightened sensitivity, the feeling of being perpetually observed radiating from every polished surface, the dark window pane, the curve of a spoon, the brass doorknob itself. He blinks, and the fleeting peripheral movements vanish, but the sensation lingers, a residue of dread, He doesn't know what it wants, or why his door, his reflection, his fear. He knows only that the knocking will resume, that the door might swing wider next time. He felt its breath, cold and stagnant, through the crack. He smelled its damp, earthy presence. He has seen his own image betray him. There is no recourse, no escape yet devised. He remains here, adrift in the humming silence, waiting for that first subtle tremor against the wood, that faint, sibilant whisper from just beyond the threshold. And he knows, with chilling certainty, that when it comes, he will be here, listening, helpless, heart-pounding, locked in this terrifying, intimate waltz with the unnameable. "17 minutes past 3 in the morning, and the digital shriek tore through the bedroom's velvet quiet. I surfaced violently from sleep, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against my ribs as my hand scrabbled across the nightstand. Unknown number. A sliver of hesitation. Let the void take it. But some deeper, darker pull, maybe instinct, maybe just a morbid fascination, compelled me to answer. Yes? My voice, a rusty hinge unused to the hour. I see you, Elara. The voice rasped, low and granular, like stones grinding together. Those curtains, barely a veil. I snapped upright, sleep vaporized. My gaze flew to the window. Drawn, yes, but suddenly they felt porous, gossamer thin, an invisible pressure, eyes boring into me from the impenetrable black outside. Who is this? I demanded, wrestling the tremor from my words. A chuckle slithered through the line, cold and sharp, raising the hairs on my arms. Just an admirer, Elara, one who's watched for quite some time. The connection died. My hand, unsteady, returned the phone to its cradle. A prank. Had to be. Some late-night cruelty, bored youth, bitter ghost from the past. Yet, sitting cocooned in the darkness, the silence now felt heavy, suffocating, pregnant with menace. This wasn't a joke. Sleep became an impossibility. I drifted in a feverish state between wakefulness and nightmare. Every floorboard creak a footstep, every rustle of ivy against the glass, a scratching finger. When the alarm finally pierced the tension at 7, the weak dawn light filtering through the blinds felt less like comfort and more like exposure. The night's terror receded slightly, assuming the hazy unreality of a bad dream. Almost. The rituals of morning, showers steam, coffee's bitter warmth, toast's crunch, were anchors I clung to, desperate to persuade myself of normalcy. By the time I stepped out, locking the door behind me, the disturbing call had been forced into a mental box, nearly sealed. The workday unfolded in a predictable cadence. Meetings droned, emails piled up. The office hummed its mundane tune, a welcome, insulating noise. It wasn't until I was gathering my things, the day's obligations fulfilled, that the memory lunged back, sharp and cold. My phone vibrated. Unknown number. A text. Crimson suits you, Elara, though I preferred the cobalt blouse from last Tuesday. Aish, flooded my veins. I glanced down at my crimson sweater, then swept my eyes frantically across the emptying office. A few colleagues remained, heads bowed over keyboards, oblivious. But the message was clear. Someone, somewhere, had watched, was watching. Keys clenched like talismans in my fist. I fled to my car. The drive home stretched into an eternity of paranoia. Each traffic light became a crucible, my eyes darting, scanning faces in adjacent vehicles, searching for the watcher in the anonymous flow of metal and glass. Inside my apartment, bolts slid home, chains rattled, curtains were yanked shut with violent finality. I collapsed onto the sofa, mind a frantic scramble. Who? Why? An old flame turned sour, a resentful coworker. No theory quite settled. None felt solid enough to explain this chilling intimacy. The phone buzzed again. Another anonymous cipher. You should eat, Elara. Lunch was barely touched. I hurled the device. It struck the rug with a muffled thud. How? How could they know the precise details? The uneaten sandwich, the skipped meal. The following days dissolved into a fog of fear. Texts and calls persisted. A relentless drip feed of my own life mirrored back at me from shifting, untraceable numbers. They chronicled my waking moments, my attire, my conversations. They even whispered knowledge of the forbidden romance novel tucked away for solitary hours. A new phone number offered no sanctuary. The police listened politely, offered sympathetic noises, but without overt threats. Their hands were tied. I was adrift in a waking nightmare, perpetually scanning my periphery, flinching at sudden noises, a prisoner in my own skin. A week after the initial violation, I was unraveling. Sleep was a forgotten luxury, food tasteless ash, work became unthinkable, the public sphere, a stage for unseen eyes. I huddled in my living room, lights extinguished, curtains drawn tight, a sentinel watching my silent phone, awaiting the next intrusion. It arrived, starkly different. I believe it's time we met, Elara. Riverside Park. Midnight. Come alone. Disappoint me, and there will be repercussions. Run. Call the police. Hide. Every sane instinct screamed retreat, but another part, exhausted by the shadows, starved for answers, whispered a dangerous counter-argument. Go. Confront this phantom. End it. Against all reason, the stroke of midnight found me navigating the deserted park. Moonlight drenched the path, carving long skeletal shadows from trees and benches. Every nocturnal sound, the sigh of wind through leaves, the snap of a distant twig, jolted my nerves raw. There, near the fountain's silent basin, stood a figure, silhouetted against the sodium glare of a distant street lamp, features lost in shadow. My heart pounded a deafening tattoo against my ribs as I approached. Hello, Elara, the figure spoke, the voice, that same gravelly rasp from the first call. I'm pleased you came. They stepped into the weak light. My breath hitched. Not the monstrous phantom of my imagination, no vengeful ex or hulking stranger. It was Silas, quiet Silas from IT, the one with the unassuming presence, the recipient of perhaps a dozen polite, forgettable greetings over the years. Why? The word tore from my throat, raw and incredulous. Why are you doing this? Silas's face contorted into something resembling a smile, devoid of warmth, chilling me to the bone. Why? Because I could. Because it was astonishingly simple. You walk through your lives, utterly oblivious to the windows you leave open, the data trails you bleed into the world. He produced a tablet, fingers dancing across the screen. Your phone, your laptop, your smart thermostat. Every connection is a vulnerability, Ilara. A doorway easily opened with the right key. Nausea churned within me. All this time, my own technology turned against me, broadcasting my existence. But me? I whispered. Why target me? A hollow laugh escaped him. You? You did nothing. You were merely available. The ideal blend of digitally trusting and technically unaware. A perfect specimen for my little exploration. Exploration, I echoed, the word tasting like poison. To test the limits, Silas said, his eyes catching the light with a feverish gleam. To see how far one could penetrate, how intimately one could inhabit another's existence undetected. And you, Ilara, you were a revelation. The details I've gleaned, the secrets observed. He trailed off, shaking his head with a bizarre, proprietary fondness. But every exploration reaches its conclusion, and I'm afraid, Ilara, your participation is scheduled for termination. As he spoke, his hand moved inside his jacket, a glint of metal, cold, hard realization, a gun. Time warped, stretching into slow motion, Silas's finger tightening, the barrel's dark eye fixing on my chest. In that suspended moment, primal survival surged. I threw myself forward, colliding with Silas, breaking his stance. We grappled, a desperate, silent struggle, punctuated only by ragged breaths. He possessed surprising strength, but terror lent me a frantic energy. A sudden, deafening crack split the night air. For an instant, suspended animation. Then Silas staggered back, shock blooming on his face. He glanced down at the rapidly spreading stain on his shirt, looked back at me, a question in his eyes, before crumpling to the ground. I stood frozen, the heavy weight of the gun unfamiliar in my hand, the echo of the shot ringing in my ears. An eternity seemed to pass before the distant wail of sirens pierced the bubble of shock, pulling me back to the chilling reality. The aftermath was a disorienting montage of flashing lights, sterile interview rooms, probing questions. Silas survived, barely. His arrest peeled back the layers of his exploration, revealing not just my ordeal, but a web of victims, their lives meticulously catalogued through the very devices meant to simplify existence. Months bled into each other. I changed. Smart devices vanished from my life. A deep-seated paranoia about my digital shadow took root. The open, trusting woman I'd been felt like a ghost, replaced by someone perpetually vigilant, forever questioning the unseen watchers. Yet, slowly, painstakingly, healing began. Trust cautiously relearned. Life tentatively reclaimed. I write this now as a testament, a warning etched in fear. In this hyper-connected labyrinth we've constructed, privacy has become a fragile commodity, perhaps an illusion altogether. Our lives are laid bare, an open text for anyone possessing the literacy to read it. So, be mindful, be wary, and never forget, in the age of the algorithm and the unseen connection, you can never be entirely certain who is watching